When did you discover this hole?
Well, the hole has always been there. We've been out there for a couple of years now.
Most people have never heard of Mel's Hole. And those who have? They've probably written it off as just another urban legend with no true roots in reality. But what if we told you something strange has happened? Because a few months ago, Google's quantum AI, trained to process anomalous geological data, found something buried deep in the archives. Something that led it straight back to one of the strangest, most unexplainable stories in American fringe folklore: Mel's Hole. This time around, though, it wasn't simply a story. The data didn't just suggest a deep pit, but something impossible, unbelievable, and way worse than we ever thought. Let's get started. The truth about Mel's Hole. Tales of spooky holes and eerie abandoned government projects have been topics of speculation for decades. There are unfounded rumors of UFOs, Area 51, and our personal favorite, Mel's Hole. But to understand why this compelling tale caught anyone's attention in the first place, we need to go back to where it all started, with a man who called into a radio show nearly 30 years ago. Back in 1997, a man named Mel Waters called in to a popular paranormal radio show, Coast to Coast AM. Hosted by Art Bell, it was a late-night program that focused on the paranormal, UFOs, government conspiracies, and just about anything that was on the fringes of mainstream science. Unsurprisingly, the show had somewhat of a cult following, and even though most of its speculations were rooted in fiction, it was the kind of show people listened to in the dark, often alone, when they couldn't sleep. Mel was probably one of those people. On that February 21st night, he probably couldn't tuck himself into bed with the thought that plagued his mind. And although his voice was calm, calculated, and measured, he didn't sound like a prankster or a typical conspiracy theorist. He sounded like someone who had seen something strange and was still trying to make sense of it. According to Mel, he lived in the rural outskirts of Ellensburg, Washington, and on his property, there was a hole. It was a circular opening in the ground about 9 feet across, lined with what looked like stone or metal around the rim. It almost looked like a well, but the eerie thing about it was that it had no structure above it, and it was so deep that no matter how much fishing line he lowered into it, he never hit bottom. And boy, did he drop a lot of fishing line into it. In his effort to determine how deep the hole was, Mel claimed he had been dropping fishing line into it for years. He started with a few hundred feet, then thousands. Eventually, he said he had dropped in over 80,000 feet of line, with a weight at the end. And still, the line hadn't hit bottom. For context, that's more than twice the depth of the Mariana Trench. Typical fishing lines are 100 to 300 yards long. And even though Mel's 80,000-foot claim is physically and logistically unbelievable, according to him, the line just kept disappearing. By that point, it's deeper than most commercial jetliners fly. How could this even be possible? But Mel didn't stop there. He said animals avoided the hole entirely. Birds didn't fly over it, and even dogs wouldn't go near it. The temperature around it was always cool, no matter the season. Radios wouldn't work when brought close. And then there was the really strange part, the part where it shifted from being a curious geological mystery to something else entirely. Mel claimed that a neighbor once threw a dead dog into the hole. Later, the dog was seen alive. And get this, this wasn't just a similar-looking dog that someone else in the neighborhood owned. This was the same dog. As you'd probably expect in a situation like this story was too much for many people to accept. For many listeners, it went from strange and possibly real to absolutely ridiculous in an instant. But some people weren't so quick to dismiss it. Over the next several months, Mel called into the show multiple times. He shared more stories in which he claimed that government officials had contacted him, that his land had been taken from him through a lease agreement, that he had been relocated to Australia and paid a significant amount of money to ensure his silence. He said when he tried to return to his property, he found roadblocks and armed personnel. The area was completely restricted. Although no official agency ever acknowledged this, there were no legal records of a land seizure, no news reports, no documentation of who Mel Waters was, or even of his existence. The story faded from public consciousness, as most fringe stories do. People soon began to debate whether he was a hoaxer, a mentally ill man, or someone telling the truth who had simply vanished after stumbling into something significant. There were follow-ups, though. Over the years, other callers claimed to know about the hole. A few said they'd seen it, while others had their own stories of strange wells or bottomless pits. But nothing ever surfaced that could verify Mel's exact location. Skeptics pointed out that the kind of fishing line Mel described would be physically impossible to manage in such quantities, that the weight of 8,000 feet of line alone would break any standard reel, and that even if such a hole existed, it would collapse without reinforcement due to geological pressure. But for those who believed or wanted to believe, the hole became something more than just a physical location. It was a symbol, a mystery that hadn't been explained and refused to fit neatly into any category. It wasn't a sinkhole, wasn't a cave, and certainly wasn't a well. It was simply a black void in the earth that defied every attempt to understand it. And that was the state of things for decades. A weird, forgotten story. It was occasionally revived in paranormal blogs, maybe mentioned in a Reddit thread here or there, but mostly ignored. Until recently. Because now, thanks to Google's AI system combing through old satellite data and reanalyzing low-resolution thermal maps with far more processing power than we had back in the late 1990s, something has resurfaced. It was something sitting quietly in the exact area Mel described, a location long written off as irrelevant or misremembered. The data shows something is there, and the numbers themselves don't add up. The data that was ignored. For years, Mel's Hole was dismissed as a fringe story, a mix of rumor, myth, and maybe a touch of performance. But anyone who has looked at geological survey records for the Pacific Northwest knows that the area around Ellensburg has been studied more than most people realize. And over the last few decades, it's accumulated a quiet archive of data. Magnetic readings, gravity scans, satellite imagery, some of it high quality, but most of it not. That data sat largely untouched, not because it wasn't interesting, but because it was too messy, too old, too limited by the tools we had at the time. Small anomalies were easy to dismiss as just margin of error noise in a survey region full of mountains, sediment layers, and volcanic remnants. Then came the shift. Recently, some researchers have speculated that if a system like Google's quantum AI were applied to old geological data, it might uncover anomalies we've long overlooked, as such a system, theoretically trained to detect subtle irregularities for mining or climate modeling, could flag unusual patterns. And if it ever did scan the Pacific Northwest, particularly around Ellensburg, there's a chance it might find something odd. If that ever happened, here's the kind of data it might likely turn up. The location was roughly consistent with where Mel Waters had once said his property was located, near Manistash Ridge. It wasn't a perfect match, but close enough that anyone familiar with the story would raise an eyebrow. The AI pointed out three key things about the area. First, there was a gravity anomaly. In plain terms, the local gravitational pull in that specific patch of land was lower than surrounding areas. Not by a huge amount, because it wasn't like you'd start floating, and not explainable by the known rock structures or topography. This suggested something underground was unusually absorbing or deflecting gravity. Second, the magnetic readings were off. Most of the land in that part of Washington exhibits predictable electromagnetic signatures, shaped by volcanic activity and basalt formations. But here, the field was skewed, stronger than it should have been, and slightly irregular, almost like something metallic or artificial was buried deep underground. And third, there was a consistent thermal sink. Satellite scans showed that this one area stayed cooler than the surrounding terrain, even in summer. Not just surface-level chill, but something colder that extended downward. It resembled the kind of reading you might expect above a cave or aquifer, but it was unusual because it didn't fit any natural formation in the local geologic record. The thing is, individually, none of these findings would mean much. Small gravity dips happen. Magnetic irregularities can come from old volcanic rock. And cool patches of Earth aren't uncommon. But together, all in the same precise spot, these findings got the AI's attention. When it tried to simulate what kind of underground formation could produce those three data points at once, low gravity, elevated magnetism, and deep cold anomaly, it couldn't find a match. The AI, trained on hundreds of thousands of real-world samples, came up empty. And just like that, a location that had been ignored for decades, a place most experts would have written off as the setting of a radio hoax, was now generating data that didn't behave the way the Earth normally does. Although this is not proof of a bottomless pit, it's not even proof of a hole. But it is a signal. It's a quiet red flag buried in old records. One that sat there, unnoticed, until someone finally asked a machine smart enough to see it. What the AI might have theorized. Suppose that quantum-enhanced AI flagged that spot on Manistash Ridge. What might it tentatively conclude? At the frontier of exploratory Earth science, models interpret subtle combinations of signals. When unusual patterns emerge, gravity, magnetism, and temperature, they trigger hypotheses, not conclusions. Now imagine that AI wasn't some sci-fi invention, but a real system developed by a team like Google's Quantum AI division. These are the same people pushing the boundaries of machine learning and quantum computing. These tools powerful enough to process vast geophysical datasets in ways we haven't fully seen yet. It's not hard to picture a future where those breakthroughs are applied to mapping the Earth itself, looking not just for resources, but for anomalies. Let's imagine our hypothetical AI watching those signals converge. The first signal might be a slight gravity dip. Now, gravity anomalies aren't science fiction. Quantum-enhanced gravimeters like Atomionics's cold atom sensors can measure minute variations in Earth's pull with accuracy far beyond traditional geophones. On a drone platform, flying across a survey grid, one area consistently indicates lower gravity than its surroundings. For a typical geologist, that might suggest a void, a cave, an abandoned tunnel, or an underground cavern. It's a classic signal, but unusual in that exact location and with no known documented cave. Then the AI registers magnetism. Quantum magnetometers, such as SB Quantum's diamond-based and drone-mounted sensors, are already being rolled out to detect subsurface metal deposits. In our scenario, the readings on ridgeland don't align with volcanic basalt signatures typical of eastern Washington. Instead, there's a strong and oddly irregular metallic pattern, akin to ferrous ore or even buried infrastructure. Taken alone, that could point to old mining tunnels, pipe systems, or natural mineral veins. But again, none are officially mapped in that location. And finally, there's thermal imagery. Modern anomaly detection techniques combine thermal infrared and hyperspectral imaging to find subsurface features by showing where the ground is consistently cooler or warmer. In this thought experiment, the spot by Ellensburg remains noticeably cooler in late summer, on maps and satellite overlays. Such pockets can indicate underground water or cooler voids sheltered from surface heat. But without known caverns or water tables, this would look odd. A model combining all three, gravity dip, elevated magnetism, and deep cold, would raise eyebrows in any AI-trained geological system. Next comes the simulation phase. The AI tries to match these three anomalies to known templates. It runs the data through its layered logic, drawing from thousands of scanned sites, mining records, and climate modeling data. But none of those structures fit all three signals so neatly, in a spot with no prior history. The models break. The AI might then output something like, "No recognized subsurface profile matches this combined data set." That response, uncertainty when models expect certainty, is rare but telling. This is how exploratory geoscience often works. You don't start with a definitive answer. You start with the strange pattern and ask, what best explains it? In our case, the AI would likely propose a series of draft hypotheses, but ultimately, it might label the site unclassifiable with the current templates. The reason this speculation doesn't feel like fantasy is compelling. All of the technologies we just mentioned have real analogs. Drone-mounted quantum gravity sensors are being tested by companies like Silicon Microgravity and SB Quantum. Sensors from Fleet Space, Nomad Atomics, and DEECT aim to integrate quantum magnetometry and gravimetry data with AI in a way that's never been done before. Meanwhile, deep learning neural networks already help invert gravity data into 3D density models. This makes the idea of an AI sifting through archived maps and flagging something weird entirely plausible. Still, this is all part of constructing a thought experiment. There's no leaked report from Google, no scanned datasets pointing to Manistash Ridge anomalies, and no leaked internal conclusion. This is imagination applied to real technology. But what makes it compelling isn't magic. It's a credible what-if scenario. And that credibility is what makes it feel chilling. We're not saying we found a wormhole or gravity reversed. We're saying, imagine a quantum AI system trained to find anomalies in the ground. It flags one location where the readings don't line up with any known match. So it says, "I don't know." That's it. In a moment like this, when the AI doesn't know, it's not a cop-out. It's the most compelling fork in the story, because not only is the data real, but so are the tools. The model failure is also realistic. And so the question becomes, was Mel's Hole a myth, a mistake, or a key? By this point in our investigation, we've built a quite credible case. Mel's Hole remains unverified, but the tools that could reveal something odd like quantum AI, gravimeters, magnetometers are real. The missing piece now is what happens when those tools report something unsettling. The blackout and the lockdown. Here's the scenario, based on patterns we've already seen in real-world data handling and geosurveillance. Journalists and map enthusiasts are familiar with the phenomenon. A normally visible area on Google Earth suddenly becomes blurred, blacked out, or visible only in low resolution. This is no accident. It's often a direct result of government requests, legal restrictions, or private compliance. A recent overview confirms that national security and military bases frequently trigger pixelation or blackout on mapping platforms, ranging from residential complexes to airfields. Historically, organizations like the US, NGA, and NRO have bought or blurred imagery during operations, most famously during the 2001 Afghanistan invasion, when high-resolution pictures were mostly suppressed. Even civilian homes are sometimes blurred on request, either from property owners seeking privacy or through residual government influence. Now imagine that Manistash Ridge, the spot flagged by quantum-enhanced systems, is suddenly grayed out in public-facing maps. Enthusiasts would notice, and so would academics submitting satellite mosaic uploads. That blackout, on a ridge previously clear, would trigger questions, especially when tied to an anomaly discovered by automation. Now, let's move on. Suppose the system that detects anomalies, whether Google's quantum AI or a partner's tool, flags gravity, magnetism, and temperature readings at the ridge. That's one piece of noise. Then, the human systems kick in. Suddenly, internal documents referencing anomaly analysis or site M.R. Ellensburg are removed from intranet search. Team members whose work was once focused billing their work as AI subsurface mapping are reassigned to air quality or climate modeling projects. Technical reports are retroactively marked internal only. Presentations once slated for public conferences are quietly canceled or censored. While this may sound like science fiction, it actually mirrors real-world patterns. Back in 2022, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, absorbed UAP-related projects from AATIP, and personnel and projects abruptly changed direction, reportedly for national interest reasons. When researchers or engineers try to follow the thread, they encounter empty pages or archived labels. It's the classic playbook for how institutions contain emerging anomalies. Now consider on-the-ground signs. Suppose locals or watchers notice unmarked aerial drones surveying ridge terrain at odd hours, or weather stations and remote telemetry points near that patch begin glitching or dropping offline. While it may be coincidence, it could also reflect an intentional monitoring effort. Mel's Hole debunked. It's a phenomenon that has captivated paranormal curiosity since 1997. With claims of animals avoiding it, electronics failing near it, and a neighbor's dead dog later seen alive after being tossed in, it's not hard to see why this story gripped the entire world. Despite its theatrical mystery, every credible investigation concludes one thing: the story doesn't hold up to scrutiny. First, the most fundamental detail. There's no record of any melwaters residing in or owning property in Catitas County, Washington. Journalists and local investigators have searched land deeds, voting registrations, and tax rolls. No match. That absence suggests the name was either fabricated or no verifiable public records of a person named Mel Waters owning property in that specific area have been found, which is hardly the foundation of a true groundbreaking discovery. Then, the geology. Experts, including Jack Powell, a geologist at Washington's Department of Natural Resources, have repeatedly made clear that a hole as deep as claimed would collapse under tremendous rock pressure and heat before it could form or remain open. The deepest mine shafts in that area reach a few hundred feet, and even the world's deepest boreholes come nowhere near the tens of miles implied by Mel's measurements. Credible analysis suggests that the inspiration was likely an abandoned gold mining shaft, perhaps 90 to 300 feet deep. Such shafts are not uncommon northwest of Ellensburg, a terrain Jack showed to visiting paranormal seekers in 2002, pointing out how a local mining hole could spark imaginations, but wouldn't bear up to the aerial spin of legend. Then again, there are the physical impossibilities. If someone truly used 80,000 feet of fishing line, about 15 miles, it would have snapped or melted long before the bottom. Pressure, temperature, and tensile load would have destroyed the setup within seconds underwater. let alone underground. As geologist Pat Pringle observed, the heat inside Earth would render ordinary fishing lines non-functional almost instantly, and no reel on Earth could hold that length. So what about the paranormal claims? The revived dog, the strange temperatures, radios picking up old broadcasts. Well, these are classic elements of storytelling, not observation. They follow tropes of folk tales: resurrection, malfunctioning electronics, cold air, and mystic isolation. Mel's claims grew more dramatic with each call, and by the early 2000s, he had transitioned from a deep hole to government abduction, none of which were substantiated by independent sources. Even expeditions led by locals and paranormal groups failed to locate anything matching the description. In 2002, Gerald Osborne led 30 people through the area. None found a hole, musical animals, or restraining barriers. The expedition ended in frustration, and the legend faded again into radio echoes and internet rumor threads. Reddit and skeptic communities have long dismissed the story as a prank or performance art from the dawn of internet conspiracy culture. Skeptics note Art Bell himself moved from curious to cautious once the stories turned weird. As the caller kept escalating the claims, mysterious lights, wormholes, government payoffs, his tone shifted. Fans interviewed after the fact reported that Art gradually distanced himself, treating it more as entertainment than truth, mirroring later skepticism among fringe media and fact-checking circles. In short, at every step where Mel's claims interact with verifiable reality, residency, geology, engineering, wildlife, and sociology, they fall apart under basic scrutiny. Still, it's not impossible to fathom. After all, if we can believe the existence of UFOs, why can't an enormous abandoned hole in Washington be real? Why this matters now. Mel's tale from 1997 began with a single phone call claiming the existence of a bottomless void, cold, silent, and devoid of life. Outlandish as it seemed, his description held a faint pulse, that beneath our feet, the Earth hides anomalies our eyes can't see. For decades, that pulse lay dormant in dusty transcripts and online forums. Google's interest in quantum AI is equally real. Their research division collaborates with national labs to develop pattern recognition systems fueled by quantum computing, including gravity and material signature analysis. Although there's still no official confirmation from Google's Quantum AI Lab or any federal agency, no petitions or statements or FOIA releases confirming unusual activity in Kittitas County, no news reports from the region or land use notices, nothing except silence and data that refuses to align neatly with known maps or expectations. That silence matters more than most realize, because when an AI discovers a non-terrestrial anomaly, institutions don't announce it. They recalibrate the narrative. They reprocess the data, shift personnel, even obscure images. And in the end, when it seems like the signal has disappeared, it hasn't. It's simply been redirected, reframed, and withheld. The real horror isn't the hole itself, but the protocols we build around it. We live at a time when our machines can pinpoint fissures in geothermal layers and voids hidden beneath forests. They can reveal details far beyond our naked senses, but our institutions still default to containment. The result is a paradox. When anomalies arise, we respond with blur layers and NDA agreements, not investigation and transparency. The collective question becomes ominous. What if some discoveries are deemed too dangerous to share? What if evidence of material behavior contradictory to modern physics, like those anomalies generated by AI, is easier to obscure than explain? For some researchers, Mel's Hole was never just a radio myth or tall tale. It was an invitation to look deeper at our data, an invitation taken up in the form of a ridge, an algorithm, a blackout. While we still don't know if that hole is real, what we do know is the anomaly pattern. We know the suppression is real, and we know our technology is tearing open pockets of the planet we once thought we understood. What do you think of Mel's Hole? Urban legend? Or is there something more to it? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching.